Okay, picking up where we left off on page 305, we're talking about the 7 habits of a successful interface designer, and we're on the 7th one. The 7th one is document everything. You know, make sure that you document all the screens, what all the functions are, you number them so you kind of can have the documentation to show in order, like you can make a storyboard and come up with sketches. If you document all this stuff, other people can come behind you and say, you know, maybe a year later and go, I wonder why they did that. And you'd say, well, hang on a second. Here? See, we tried this, we tried that, and the user said, no, put this here. If you don't document that, then you got nothing. Okay. So on page 307, they talk about the handbook for user interface design. And we're going to go through some rules. And the first one, rule number 1, talks about create an interface that's easy to learn and use. Now, that sounds incredibly obvious, but there are some situations where you can kind of get lost. For example, they talk about, focus on the system design objectives. What are you trying to do? Create a design that's easy to understand and remember. In other words, make it so it's not something so strange that they've never seen this before ever. Make it comfortable and normal for them. Provide commands, actions, and responses that are consistent and predictable. So, for example, if the clear command on one screen clears the user input, but the clear button on some other screen clears a database record, well, then don't do that. Use different words, because you want the clear button to do the exact same thing on every single screen. Don't use the same term to mean different things. And clearly label all the controls. Don't just have something stuck out there. And select familiar images and things that they can catch. Now here's an example of some bad ones. This is at figure 8.8, where they have some graphics. And if that popped up on the screen, I'd look at it and go, okay, I have some sort of an alarm bell going off. I wonder what that means. I have no idea what this, like maybe not a group. I have no idea what that means. Here's some messages which are clearly written by a computer geek that mean nothing to the user. Check instructions for this task and the previous task. Okay. The data is incorrect. Well, thank you very much. How do I fix it? So, in theory, all this kind of user interface, you should be telling them things that are useful. For example, yes, it's perfectly okay to say you made a mistake, but you should also include what to do to fix it. So, don't just say not enough data to proceed, period. Say not enough data to proceed, please fill in box number 4 or something. Give them some information on how to correct the problem. Don't just say, no, you made a mistake. That's the kind of weird stuff that happens. And inexperienced user interface designers will do this. There's another one that basically talks about the organization. Make it consistent. So like you have a main menu, and maybe there's one for customers, and maybe this is a screen for customers, and there's a button that's where you can add a customer, update a customer, delete a customer. Those kind of things. So make it so that it kind of makes sense and kind of flows. So either menu items or screens or buttons, it all kind of makes sense. Okay, so it all should be kind of logical and all should flow. And for example, let's say that you are you're a salesperson in this customer tracking system, and so you deal with customers and orders a great deal. But you personally don't deal with products at all. In other words, you don't have the authority to enter a new product, update a product, or delete a product. Well, if that's the case, then either don't show the menu at all, or dim it out. In the menu, you can show something where it's gonna be, but you can see where it's unavailable, and so it's kind of dimmed out, and so you can tell it's there, but you can't click on it. So don't allow them to click on things for which they don't have any business going there, and probably don't have permission to perform that task anyway. So make it specific to them. Okay. And of course, no matter where you are in this structure, you should be able to go back one more level, or perhaps back up to the top. Find them some sort of a navigation way to get back to the main menu, or get back to the whatever you're at, like the customer menu. Okay. Rule number 2 on the next on bottom of page 307. They talk about organizing tasks, commands, and functions that are in groups that resemble the actual business functions. So, for example, you as a developer might think that overriding a grade point average belongs in the registrar's office, for a student system. But that's not the way the college is set up. The provost marshal is the provost is the one who overrides grades. So don't put it where you think it ought to go. Put it where they think it ought to. They're organized that way, so make your menus match their organization. So it may make no sense to you whatsoever, but that's the way they do it, and so by God, that's the way the menus ought to be done. And they talk about create the menu list and place the selections used frequently at the top. Again, you might have to do some metrics to figure that out. Provide shortcuts for experienced users that can go directly to things. For example, perhaps for let's say that adding a new customer is a very common thing for this guy to do, and so you have Alt-N or something that adds a new customer. And so as the guy learns it and gets more familiar, he can just use keyboard shortcuts to directly to the screens that he's familiar with. The next two they talk about are really going to be talked again in Rule 6, so I'm just going to skip over that. They talk about provide fast find features. You know how this is called autocomplete. I'm typing a student's name, I go SM, and then autocompletes and says Smith. I don't have to type the entire thing. But again, you're just making life easy for the user. And if available, consider some sort of a natural language kind of a thing. So if they're trying to query student data as an example, that they don't have to learn SQL just to be able to operate your application. Okay. Rule 3 on bottom of page 308. They talk about providing users with help and feedback. Ensure that help is always available on demand. There should be either a menu item for help or a button that's in a consistent location. For example, maybe up in the upper right-hand corner or something on every single screen. It's always in the same place, or the menu is always in the same place so they can get to it. Provide user-selected help and context-sensitive help. When I have a problem with adding a new customer and I'm in this screen, I hit help. I don't want to get the help for everything. I want to zoom into adding a new customer. So context-sensitive help. If I'm on a particular button, then or a field in the data, in the form, I want help on that one field. So context-sensitive help. Okay, and there's an awful lot of scenarios where you might want to have some user confirmation, like if you're getting ready to delete a record. Wouldn't it be cool if it popped back up and said, "Man, are you sure?" So those kinds of things to provide them some help and some feedback. And there's one more part here that talking about errors. What happens when you make an error? If a user creates an error, you're supposed to highlight the erroneous part and allow them to make corrections without having to retype the whole thing. I mean, don't wipe the form clean and say do it again. That would be bad. Highlight the one part that they're on and allow them to fix it, just that one piece. That kind of makes sense, right? But here's an overall philosophy that's not really in the book. Hint, hint, hint. You guys figured out these hints yet? Like what might or might not be on a test? Okay, pay attention. There's an overall philosophy on user interface design that talks about preventing errors versus catching errors. It's incredibly easy to catch an error and do the no, you made a mistake. But it's a lot harder to go in and fix your form so that they cannot make a mistake. For example, entering dates. If you have a Microsoft kind of a scenario, they have this thing called a date picker. And if I use the date picker to allow them to put the date in, it's practically impossible for them to screw up. They can't type 1, 2, 3, 4. It will not allow them to type 1, 2, 3, 4 because that's not a valid date. They can't type hello because that's not a valid date. So this data validation tools allows me to to prevent an error. And if you prevent errors up front, then that's so much better than catching an error. So prevention is a lot better than catching. Okay, let's continue. So rule 3, continuing, talks about use hypertext links to provide them additional information. Display messages in a logical place. For example, if there's an error message that pops up, you might want to have it dead center, front and center in their face to show them, oops, you made a mistake. Or maybe there's a little message box someplace on your form that pops up. I will tell you though, if you're going to have a specific part of your form where messages appear, as you're typing, your form better fit all on one page. Because if you scroll down and you no longer can see that box when an error message pops up, you'll be totally clueless that an error message occurs because you scrolled down too far. So that technique of consistent place and location works very well as long as the form physically fits on the screen really well. Okay, and of course there's some notes here that just kind of make sense. Like if you're going to pop up a screen, tell them something or have a message show up, leave it on the screen long enough for them to actually read it. I mean, they could be getting a phone call or something and be distracted and completely miss the message. And here's another one. Sometimes when you're doing something, you want an okay to come back. Like I'm doing something and I hit the button and you go, then the phone rings and you wonder, did I hit submit? I don't remember. Wouldn't it be kind of cool that whenever you hit submit, you got a little box that pop up and said, record inserted correctly, or thank you for your input, or something. So that if they got distracted and turned back to their screen, they go, oh, I must have hit submit because I got a prompt back. So give them some sort of an indication, even for success. Before we were talking about giving them feedback for things that go wrong. Sometimes now again, if you're just doing data entry and that's all you're doing, boom, 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 you might having a big pop-up screen that says entered correctly might not work. So not appropriate for every scenario. Okay. Make sure your messages make sense, that are easy to understand, and provide solutions, not just nah, 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 nah. That's the most horrible error messages in the world, are the ones like from Microsoft that says Microsoft had an illegal exception, and it's like, okay, what do you want me to do about it? So yes, make sure that they understand what the messages are about and what it is they can do. Okay, on page 310 they talk about the create an attractive layout and design. Now sometimes you want to create a design that exactly matches the physical world. So for example, let's say that you're you're a locomotive operator and you're used to the buttons and dials and levers on the physical interface being in a particular order. And then now you're going to come in and automate this system and replace all those buttons and dials and levers with a graphical user interface. You could take the time and energy to make it look just like the physical things. The dials in the exact same spot, the exact same shape, with the exact same scale, the levers in the exact same proportional location. If the lever was to the left, then make sure it's still to the left. Those kind of things. And here's an example from a real life scenario. So here's a calculator. This is a physical device. I just scanned the output of this calculator. And here is an application that's designed to be a replicant of that particular thing. So this is what it looks like. And you'll notice that it is practically identical. Everything is in the exact same location and it looks exactly the same. So that if you're familiar with one, you don't have to deal with the new one at all. There's no training curve whatsoever because it's absolutely identical. This is probably a good place to stop at the 15-minute mark. We'll catch you again in just a few.